All right, so now that you've had a couple days to work on the study guide, I figured I would go over the study guide like I did for the midterm. So let's go right ahead and get started. A U.S. consumer magazine asked all adult subscribers whether they had used alternative medical treatments, and if so, whether they had benefited from them. For almost all of the treatments, approximately 18% of those responding reported cures or substantial improvement in their condition. What is the population? The population is who are they hoping, what are they hoping to learn about, or what group of people are they hoping to learn about? So our choices are all adults in the country and those who do not use medical treatment. The only one that logically makes sense is A, right? um, because the survey was whether they had used alternative medical treatments or not. So it would not make sense if that were the population. They're hoping to learn about people, adults who used medical treatment. Um, let's go to B. What is the population parameter of interest? So the population parameter of interest, that is, again, what piece of data are they actually measuring? So the key is right here. Approximately 18% of those responding reported cures or substantial improvement. So they're looking at the percentage of, or proportion. Proportion means percentage. So they're looking at the percentage of people who used and benefited from alternative medicine. So the key is in this sentence right here. What is the sample for this study? So a U.S. consumer magazine asked all adult subscribers whether they had used alternative medical treatments. So the sample were the subscribers to that magazine, who responded to the survey. What sampling method was used? So the key is, again, the consumer magazine used or asked all adult subscribers whether they had used it or not. So that is a classic example of a voluntary response sample. So they either the people chose to respond or people chose not to respond. And if you look back at our PowerPoint, is a voluntary response sample truly random? And the answer is, of course, no. Okay, and that's number one. Number two, we're doing the same thing. So this was the one about asking if drinking and driving was a serious problem. Um, so the population, our two choices are adults or all adults except those who work at bars. That one makes no sense. So our population again is adults. Our population parameter of interest. So what piece of data, what question are they asking? They stopped every 15th adult who came out of the bar and asked whether he or she thought drinking and driving was a serious problem. So it's the percentage or proportion of people who think drinking and driving is a serious problem. The sample, they stopped every 15th adult. All right. Every 15th adult, that is a classic example of a systematic sample. Any potential sources of bias you can detect and any problems you see in generalizing to the population of interest. Okay. The problem was, and there was a problem similar to this in your assignment on these chapters, is that they waited outside a bar. Okay. So the fact that people are leaving a bar could influence their opinions of whether drinking and driving is a serious problem or not. So the answer in this case, again, is A. Okay. Let's continue to number 3. Okay. Environmental agency took soil samples at 20 locations near a former industrial waste dump and checked each for evidence of toxic chemicals. They found no elevated levels of any harmful substance. So, what is the population? Um, let's see. They took samples near a formal industrial waste dump, soil samples. So the population, what they're learning about is not the actual waste dump itself, it's the soil that's around the waste dump. What is the population parameter of interest? So they checked checked each sample for evidence of toxic chemicals. So they took a sample and then they tested to see whether there was a toxic chemical or not. So what they were looking for, what they were measuring, is whether there was a toxic chemical or not. What is the sample for this study? Took soil samples at 20 locations, so it's the 20 soil samples. Okay. What sampling method was used? Well, let's read the statement again. An environmental agency took soil samples at 20 locations near a formal industrial waste dump and checked each for evidence of toxic chemicals. They found no elevated levels of any harmful substance. I don't know about you guys, but it really doesn't explain how they decided on those 20 samples. So we simply don't know if it was if it were stratified sampling. We don't know if it was systematic sampling or not. So really, we don't know what sampling method was used. Um, is the sampling method used random? Well, if we don't know what the sampling method used was, if it's not clear from this blurb up here, then we don't know whether it was actually random or not. And I'm getting the pin. Nope, I'm not getting the pinwheel of death. Okay. Athletes who had suffered sprained ankles were randomly assigned to one of two exercise programs. The first group returned to sports activity in a mean of 40 and a half days. Those assigned to the second program returned to sports in a mean of 27.4 days. Identify whether the above research is an observational study or an experiment. So, what is the difference between an observational study and an experiment? Well, look back at our notes, but the quick version is an observational study is what it says. It's purely observational. Participants may not even know that they're participating in the study. They're not assigned to a group or to a treatment or to a program. In an experiment, the opposite is true. In an experiment, you are actually assigned to a treatment, to a program, to a group. So the key is that the athletes were randomly assigned to one of two exercise programs. In this case, the treatment groups are your exercise programs. So this is an experiment. Okay. Identify the subjects studied. Okay. Athletes who had suffered sprained ankles were randomly assigned. So athletes who had suffered sprained ankles, those were the participants. Remember, subjects means participants in the study. Okay. So if we look at our other choices, okay, the participants were not people, they were athletes who suffered sprained ankles. Identify the number of treatments. In other words, how many groups are there? Where there were two exercise programs, so there are two treatments. Identify the response variable measured. First group returned to sports activity in a mean of 40.5 days. Those assigned to the second program returned to sports. So they were measuring how much time it took for them to return to the field of play. Okay, so the time before returning to sports. Okay, identify whether the experiment was blind or double blind. Remember, blinding means that the participants, the subjects, don't know which group they've been assigned to until after the fact. Um, Double blind means that the participants and the judges, both both of those groups, they don't know which groups the participants were assigned to until after the fact. So it doesn't say here whether the athletes knew which group they were in. It doesn't say that. So we don't know whether there was blinding or not. Okay, it doesn't specifically say, so we can't answer whether it was single or double blinded. Identify the nature and scope of the conclusion. Let's see. Since there was no randomization, okay, I can already say from those first few words there, A is not the answer because the athletes were randomly assigned. So there was randomization, which means the answer has to be B. Assuming that the athletes actually followed the exercise program, this experiment can help determine which of these two exercise programs is more effective at rehabilitating sprained ankles. All right, and that's it for number 4. Over a 4-month period, among 30 people with bipolar disorder, patients who were given a high dose of omega-3 fats from fish oil improved more than those given a placebo. This experiment involved a control group of subjects who received a placebo. Remember, a placebo is a fake treatment. So one group of people were given the actual omega-3 fats or whatever it was, and the other group were given something that looked like the actual thing, felt like, smelt like, tasted like the actual thing, but it was just a fake treatment. So why didn't the experimenters just give the omega-3 fats to see if they improved? If you look back at the notes from chapter 11, we talked about the best experiments are comparative. One of the characteristics of a good experiment is that it is comparative in nature. If you just give everyone the treatment, you have nothing to compare it to. Whereas if you give half of them the treatment and half of them the placebo, then you could actually compare those results. So they need to compare omega-3 fat results to something. All right. Number 6, an experiment investigates a dietary approach to treating bipolar disorder. Researchers randomly assigned 28 subjects to 2 treatment groups, one taking a high dose and the other a placebo. So same concept from the last question. Why is it important to randomize in assigning the subjects to the group? Randomization is the name of the game. It is incredibly important. If you don't randomly assign people to the subjects to those groups, it could affect the results. Okay, it could affect the results. Whereas if you randomly assign, you can't 100% get rid of bias, but if you randomly assign, it could alleviate, or I think in this case they say equalize. Okay, it equalizes those unknown factors, those what they call uncontrollable sources of variation. In other words, it equalizes, it alleviates, it lessens the effects of those potential sources of bias. So the answer in this case is C. What would be the advantages and disadvantages of using 100 subjects instead of 28? Well, in other words, what would be better about having a larger sample size versus a smaller sample size? Well, it's the same thing that we talked about in the previous part. If you have a larger sample size, it minimizes the effect of any potential source of bias. Okay. Because again, you can't 100% eliminate all bias. So you want to alleviate, lessen the effects of those sources of bias. So it minimizes the impact of individual variability. But if there are more participants, it's going to take more time. So the answer in this case is C. Number 7, a study published in a certain medical journal cast significant doubts on suggestions that adults who drink wine have higher levels of good cholesterol and fewer heart attacks. These researchers followed a group of individuals born at a hospital between 1931 and 1943 for 16 years. Their study found that in this group, the adults who drank wine were richer and better educated than those who did not. Um, so, in other words, is that what kind of study? In other words, is it an experiment or is it an observational study? So, in an experiment, if this were an experiment, that means the people that were part of this study, these people that were born at a hospital between 1931 and 1943, um, in other words, if those people would have A, known that they were participating in the study, and two, been randomly assigned to one of the groups. In other words, half of them would have drank wine, half of them would have not drank wine. Well, if you read this, it doesn't really look like they actually did that. They didn't randomly assign people to a group that drank wine and a group that didn't drink wine. So it looks like they were just observing to see what happened. So this is an observational study, not an experiment. Why is that important? Because then that answers the second part. All right. Can an observational study prove cause effect? Okay. Only experiments can. If you look at our notes, we talked about that only experiments can prove cause effect. Okay. So studies of this type can prove none of these. Okay. You can't prove cause effect unless you do an experiment. And this was an observational study. All right. Is a coin flip random? Why or why not, in your opinion? So let's think about this here. Um, a, is it possible to predict the results of a coin flip? Yes, of course it is. That's why they do coin flips before every single football game that there is. But do we? But can you predict it 100% of the time? No. That's what makes it random. So the answer is yes. It is random. Okay. You can't. It isn't humanly possible to predict it 100% of the time. Okay. If you could, then you'd have to be the luckiest person on the face of this earth. All right. Number 9, a study found that out of every 100 babies born in country A, 5 have some kind of major birth defect. How would you assign random numbers to conduct a simulation based on this statistic? So the key is 5 out of 100. Okay. 5 out of 100. So 5% have a birth defect, 95% don't have a birth defect. 5 out of 100. So we're not going to use 3-digit numbers. We're going to use 2-digit numbers because of 100. So that takes out B and C. So the question is, which one represents 5 out of 100? Well, is it 00 to 5 or 00 to 4? Well, if we count 00, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you count that, that's 5. Whereas 00 to 5 would be 6 out of 100. So the answer in this case is A. Number 10. This is the assigning states. Okay, so we're assigning states from 1 to 50. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can copy and paste this here. I can't, so I'm just going to do this right on here, and you're going to look at our mouse. So because there are 50 states, we're going to go 2 digits at a time. So the first 2 digits are 1, 5, so 15. Is that a possible state number? Of course it is. So the first state that the first student gets is 15. If we keep going, we have 75. That is too high. So we're going to skip that, and we're going to go to the next 2 digits, which are 35. That works. So the first student is going to get state number 15 and state number 35. Okay, that's part A. And if we continue from there, we have 15 and then 35. So continue. The next 2 is 05. So 5. That is a possible state number. So 05. The next 2 digits are 35. Well, 35 has already been taken, so we're going to skip that. And then we're going to go to the next 2 digits, which is 20. That is not too high. That's not been taken already. So the second student is going to get state number 5 and state number 20 based on that random digit table. Okay. Let's see. Names of 20 students in an English class are given in the accompanying list. The teacher will assign a group of 4 students to prepare a class presentation on posts. So which 4 students did the teacher pick given the random numbers and the list below? So we're doing the same thing, except we're looking at 20 instead of 20 possibilities for the 20 students instead of 50 possibilities for the 50 states. So we're going to go 2 digits at a time. So the first 2 digits are 7. 07, so that is Lubkowski. So that is the first student, which means we've eliminated A and B. We're down to C and D. Next one is 67. Okay, that's too big. Next one is 64. That's too big. The next one is 05, which is Kong. Well, that doesn't help us. So we're going to keep going. The next one is 19, which is Quack. Or I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Quack. So if we look at our 2 choices we're down to, we could stop right there because C has Quack as the third student and D does not. So the answer in this case is C. All right. And let's see, we're down to our last one. An amusement park has opened a new roller coaster. It is so popular that people are waiting for up to 3 hours for a 2-minute ride. Concerned about how people who might be willing to wait in line for 3 hours feel about this, they survey every 10th person in line for the roller coaster. Every 10th person. Every 10th person in line for the roller coaster. That is a systematic sample. The system is every 10th person. Is the sample likely to be representative of people in line for the roller coaster? Okay. Well, they're surveying every 10th person in line. So they're not surveying every 10th person as they're entering the park or exiting the park. I think that was the example that was given in the assignment. they're actually surveying every 10th person in line for the roller coaster. So as long as they're following that to a T, is it likely to be representative? Yes, of course it is. Okay. And that is it. All right. So I have gone over the study guide. I would encourage you to email me or send me a text message on Google Voice or video chat if you have any additional questions on this study guide or just on this section in general. Tomorrow, I will, just like I did on the midterm, tomorrow I will open the test at approximately 6:30 in the morning, and I'm gonna leave it open for 48 hours. So basically, you'll have until Saturday morning. I'll open it on Thursday. You'll have it tomorrow, which is Thursday, and you'll have until Saturday morning, and I will grade them on Saturday morning. All right. So good luck, everyone. And again, make sure you contact me if you have any questions.